Let's see. Huh. Yeah, it's on. All right. All right, guys, so how's it going? So today we're going to be talking about our walls and ceiling that we put in. It's absolutely pouring down today. As you can see. And so you have to excuse a little bit of the rain noise in the background. I went ahead and set up the lav mic, so hopefully we can kind of get rid of a lot of that. But anyway, I'm going to talk a little loud. Hopefully it sounds okay, so just bear with me. Putting walls in a van. I think I went into it a little bit too positive because it turned out to be a little bit harder than what I expected. Let's start with how we put our slats into the side of the van. So I went with a treated slat. This is looks like a 2-inch by 3/4 inch piece of wood. These normally came in like 12 feet long pieces, and I just cut them to the length we needed to, and then I ran them vertically with the van walls. So you can see here, just a regular piece of treated wood, you know, no big deal. But what this was going to allow us to do is so that way we can have this, and then we're going to screw tongue and groove board into here. It was a pretty simple process. I used 2 to 3 different self-tapping screws. I did a lot of testing with these just to make sure that I used a self-tapping screw that was actually going to hold strongly even after vibrations and stuff like that. What ended up working great for me was this self-tapping screw right here. It's a coarse thread, 2-inch self-tapping bit. I could actually grab a hold of the slat after I bolted it in place and pull on it with as hard as I could, and it would never break loose. And that was just off one of the self-tapping bolts. So I used 2 to 3 on each single slat down the van, and I spaced them out accordingly to the length of our pieces of wood. So moving on to our actual flooring, this is a light tongue and groove. It's a flooring material that we used for both the walls and the ceiling. It's water resistant. So these pieces were roughly about 5 foot in length. And what I wanted was I wanted each piece to be supported 3 different times with the slat. So obviously this piece is cut shorter just for, you know, to show as an example. But your slat, just pretend this is a 5 foot piece, would be here, here, and here. And that way we had 3 different points of contact where the tongue and groove was actually screwed to the wall. Now, to be totally honest, this is completely overkill. The more we looked at it, about halfway through getting the wall done, we realized that once these tongue and groove pieces are like seated together, they almost felt sturdy enough to be the wall themselves without even having to be screwed into anything. But of course, rather be safe than sorry. And in each one of those pieces, we ended up doing 2 different screws on each one, which again, maybe overkill, but I think the aesthetic actually looked pretty good and it turned out great. So the screws that we wanted to use on these, it was actually a drywall screw, very similar to a wood screw. And I think this is a 1-inch screw, and we went with a black screw. But what we did is we drilled pilot holes because we didn't want anything splitting. I wasn't really worried about the paneling splitting or the tongue and groove board. I was more worried about our actual slats. So we drilled a pilot hole, and then I went about countersinking the tongue and groove board just a little bit, so that way these seated perfectly flush and it didn't look like they were smashing into the wood. So let's talk about the ceiling. We had a few different thought processes on the ceiling, on whether or not we should put slats on the ceiling first and then put up our tongue and groove board. But after some thinking about it, Paige said, why don't we just bolt the tongue and groove board straight to the ceiling? Now at first I was like, you know, that doesn't sound like a great idea, but the more research I did online, there were some people who were using actual like rivet guns to mount their ceiling into place. So if you currently have a Promaster or you're looking into getting one, you're going to realize that the ceiling actually has beams running across. So there's these support beams, right? And this has got about an inch to inch and a half of space between that rib and the ceiling of your van. So what we did is we would hold up our board up against the ceiling, and then we would drill a hole through the wood and into, or the support rib of the van ceiling. Now, this may sound scary to a bunch of people, but as long as you're going slow with it and you're being careful, you know, you don't really risk the chance of running the bit up through the van ceiling unless you're just being careless about it. Sometimes we only did 2 rivets per board, but try to do 3 a lot of the times. So we would do 3 different holes, pull the board back down. We would paint those holes to make sure that they're not going to develop any sort of rust issues later. And then we'd put the board back up and we used a rivet gun. So our rivet gun, this one right here, we actually got this at Harbor Freight for, I believe, under 10 bucks. So this one can fit 4 different sizes, and the rivets we went with were, I don't know the exact size on these, and it's going to depend on your tongue and groove board depth and the sheet metal. So being that the sheet metal was thin, the rivets that we ended up using were a little bit fatter, and these can hold up to 330 pounds a piece. Now, that's what they tell you. I don't know if I would 100% go off that, but we have 2 to 3 rivets in each board. So I think our ceiling is going to hold just fine. So to give you an example of how this works, I'm going to take my rivet gun here. Let me get you in focus. And we're going to take our rivet. This slips into the end of here. Now I have an example board right here that's got a hole drilled in it. So that will fit through the hole, and your sheet metal will be on the side where my thumb is. So as you're tightening this up, it will squeeze itself up onto the metal, forming a almost like washer style piece. Let me show you what that's going to look like. Give me a second to squeeze it a little bit. Oops. Okay. So when you end up squeezing it as tight as it will go, the little tip piece will break off into your rivet gun, okay? And then it'll just fall out so you can replace it with another one. Here is what it will look like when it's finished. You'll see it leaves a nice button right here on the facing of your tongue and groove board. And on the back side, it forms a little fat nugget, which seals and puts pressure with your sheet metal and your tongue and groove board together, seating them perfectly together. And again, this is supposed to hold anywhere from 250 to 330 pounds, and it depends on which rivet you use, but the bigger you go, normally the more weight it will hold. So, some people ask, well, isn't that sort of a long-term thing? No. Okay, so there was actually a few boards that I actually ended up messing up and we had to redo. It was pretty easy to just take the original drill bit that we used to drill the hole for these and drilled out the hole. So you put your drill bit right on here in the center, you drill it right through and it'll pop through, and then you can redo the rivet if you need to. So it's not a big deal. I didn't go over that, but your drill bit needs to be the exact same size as your actual rivet, so that way your rivet fits almost cleanly up in there with as little excess room as possible. And this just ensures that you're going to have a perfect seal between your rivet, your sheet metal, and your tongue and groove board. And another important tip is when you're putting in tongue and groove board, especially with, our tongue and groove, it was better to start at, you got to pick either the top or bottom. I would suggest starting at the bottom, okay? That way, as you're putting the boards together, you want to start at one and you want to go down the side of your van and keep going, and then you're going to start on the next one. Because like for us, you can actually see right here in the background, we did these like a split. So your first layer we just did across, and then the second layer was like a half. So let's see if I can show you the wall right here behind me. You'll see we have one full bore here, and then the next two are split in the half of this, and that's like the scheme that we took on our wall. So this kind of helps hide any imperfections, you know, if you were to get something off a little bit, and it also helps keep all these pieces where they're hooking together right here on the end, like seated together really well, because then you have one full board going along the bottom and the top. So it was super simple once you started getting things lined up. So I'll actually show you the spots that were a little rough to deal with, because we were trying to get as much spacing as possible, or let me rephrase that, trying to get as much space as possible out of our van. We wanted these slats to be forming to the wall as close as possible. So this wasn't a perfect flat surface. Sometimes it dipped in a little bit, sometimes it bowed out in certain sections, but we wanted every millimeter and inch we could possibly get for space. So let me show you an example of a really annoying spot that was hard to deal with. Right here on the Promaster, this spot bows out real bad. It's one of the support beams running along the side of the van, and it bows out here at the top and at the very bottom. So obviously it was really hard to put our board along the side here. It caused our wood to have to be bowed out a little bit, and there's a spacing under here. Now I did this on purpose because I knew that our cabinet was going to be placed here, and the bottom of our floor of the cabinet was going to be right where that lip was going to be sticking out. So it kind of worked out perfect. It won't be noticeable. And we positioned our cabinets, and they're going to be hiding these places of the van that were a little wonky to put up our walls in. Other than that, because these boards are a perfect fit, the corners between, so you got your ceiling and you have your wall, and then you have the space here that's got to be at an angle. And that spacing there is kind of hard to get perfect, because being that these are meant to be on flat ground, they don't do real well when you try to put them together, you know, at a crooked angle. So what I ended up having to do is I took my sander that has a belt. So, and I would end up just slowly shaving away at the sides here. And what that would allow me to do is I would slowly shave away until it could perfectly fit into place. And I'll show you a closer up image right here. And even though it's not perfect in all scenarios, it still came out better than if I was to like swap and use a different wood or something. But that's all, you know, personal preference between people. So anyway, guys, that's all I got for this video. If you have any questions, please leave those below. Again, I'm sorry about the rain. It's just, you know, we're moving around today. We're actually on the road, having a little adventure. I'm off on a Christmas break, and yeah, it just happens to be raining. So if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like. If you want to continue to see our videos of our build, subscribe to us, and yeah, appreciate all the support, guys. Thanks. Have a good one.